This episode is brought to you by Threshing Floors Farms. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If I could just ask you one favor before we get to the meat of the show. If you have a Facebook page, please go like the Threshing Floors Farm Facebook page. There you will find tons of edifying stuff to help you in your journey of, how should I put this? Self-sufficiency. There you will learn tips with canning, raising meat chickens, gardening, and several things. If you do not have a Facebook page, however, we completely understand, and we do want you to follow our Substack page, metanoionmedia.substack.com, where a special Threshing Floors Farm page will be coming soon. That's metanoionmedia.substack.com. Subscription base is free, so make sure that you go check that out. That's metanoionmedia.substack.com. And now, it's time for CCR Weekly with your host, Trey Harris. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of CCR Weekly. I am your host, Trey Harris, and I just want to thank you all for joining me on today's episode. So this one, to me, it's going to be an absolutely exciting episode because we're going to be continuing where we left off on Friday night with Dan and Brian on Spiritual Warfare Friday. And we're going to be looking at, some more instances with Arthurian Legend and how they, there's archetypes here that are used. And we're going to just be looking at a few of them, not in any particular order. So I don't want, you to think we're going in necessarily any chronological order. These are just some of the ones that I've noticed and I think is interesting. So, without further ado, let's get into this first segment, which is, the sword and the stone. And this archetype of the chosen one, right? And we're going to be looking at chapter 5 of Le Morte d'Arthur, how Arthur was chosen king, and of the wonders and marvels of the sword taken out of the stone by the said Arthur. It says, then stood the realm in great jeopardy long while, for every lord that was mighty of men made him strong. Excuse me. And many weened to have been king. Then Merlin went to the Archbishop of Canterbury and counseled him for to send for all the lords of the realm and the gentlemen of arms that they should to London come by Christmas. So here we have one of these pagan holy days. Come by Christmas upon pain of cursing. And for this cause, that Jesus that was born on that night, that he would of his great mercy show some miracle, as he was come to be king of mankind. For to show some miracle, who should be rightwise king of this realm. So the archbishop, by the advice of Merlin, sent for the lords and the gentlemen of arms, that they should come by Christmas even unto London. And many of them made clean of their life, that their prayer might be more acceptable unto God. So in the greatest church of London, whether it were Paul's or not, the French book maketh no mention, all the estates were long or day in the church for to pray. And when matins and the first mass was done, there was seen in the churchyard against the high altar a great stone, 4 square, like unto a marble stone. And in the midst thereof was an anvil of steel, 1 foot on high, and therein stuck a fair sword, naked by the point. And the letters that were written in gold about the sword said thus: Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of all England. Then the people marveled and told it to the archbishop. I command, said the archbishop, that ye keep you within your church and pray unto God still, that no man touch the sword till the high mass be all done. So when all masses were done, all the lords went to behold the stone and the sword. And when they saw the scripture, some essayed, such as would have been king. But none might stir the sword nor move it. He is not here, said the archbishop, that shall achieve the sword, but doubt not, God will make him known. But this is my counsel, said the archbishop, that we let pervade 10 knights, men of good fame, and they to keep this sword. So it was ordained and then there was made a cry that every man should essay that would for to win the sword. And upon New Year's Day, let the barons make a jousts and tournaments, that all knights with joust or tourney there might play. And all this was ordained for to keep the lords together and the commons. For the archbishop trusted that God would make him known that should win the sword. So upon New Year's Day, when the service was done, the barons rode unto the field, some to joust and some to tourney. And so it happened that Sir Ector, that had great livelihood about London, rode unto the joust, and with him rode Sir Kay his son, and young Arthur, that was his nourished brother. And Sir Kay was made knight on All Hallowmass afore. So they knighted him on November 1st, the day after Halloween, in other words. So as they rode to the joustward, Sir Kay lost his sword, for he had left it at his father's lodging. And so he prayed young Arthur for to ride for his sword. I will well, said Arthur, and rode fast after the sword. And when he came home, the lady and all were out to see the jousting. Then was Arthur wroth, and said to himself, I will ride to the churchyard, and take the sword with me that sticketh in the stone. For my brother Sir Kay shall not be without a sword this day. So when he came to the churchyard, Sir Arthur alighted and tied his horse to the stile. And so he went to the tent and found no knights there, for they were at the jousting. And so he handled the sword by the handles, and lightly and fiercely pulled it out of the stone, and took his horse, and rode his way until he came to his brother Sir Kay, and delivered him the sword. And as soon as Sir Kay saw the sword, he wist well it was the sword of the stone. And so he rode to his father Sir Ector, and said, Sir, lo, here is the sword of the stone, wherefore I must be king of this land. When Sir Ector beheld the sword, he returned again and came to the church, and there lay alighted all three, and went into the church. And anon he made Sir Kay swear upon a book how he came to that sword. And Sir, said Sir Kay, by my brother Arthur, for he brought it to me. How gat ye this sword? Said Sir Ector to Arthur. Sir, I will tell you. When I came home from my brother's sword, I found nobody at home to deliver me his sword. So I thought my brother Sir Kay should not be swordless. And so I came hither eagerly, and pulled it out of the stone without any pain. Found ye any knights about this sword? Said Sir Ector. Nay, said Arthur. Now, said Sir Ector to Arthur, I understand ye must be king of this land. Wherefore I, said Arthur, and for what cause? Sir Ector, for God will have it so. For there should never have For there should never man have drawn out this sword, but he that shall be rightwise king of this land. Now let me see whether ye can pull the sword there as it was, and pull it out again. That is no mastery, said Arthur. And so he put it in the stone, wherewithal Sir Ector essayed to pull out the sword, and failed. And so Lamort de Arthur goes out, and they have Arthur pull it out over and over again. If you've seen the Disney classic, The Sword in the Stone, this is nothing new. You know the story. Now, I could go on, and I could read to you from T.H. White's The Once and Future King cycle, with the first book in that being The Sword in the Stone. And you could get a little more of a detailed novelization of how it happened. But what I want you to notice is that no man was able to pull out this sword except he who was this king, this chosen one, as it were. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go from this segment, and we're going to immediately transition into a story from the Book of Jasher. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Book of Jasher, it's referenced in Joshua chapter 10:13, 2 Samuel 1:18. It's mentioned by name there, and there's also a reference to it in 2 Timothy 3:8, where it says that Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, talking about the Egyptian magicians, whose names were never mentioned in the Bible, but they are mentioned in the Book of Jasher. So we're going to turn this around, come back in the next segment, and we're going to look at the Book of Jasher and a very similar story that I believe the Arthurian cycle is based on. All right, so when it comes to the Book of Jasher, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at the story in Jasher chapter 77 in regards to Moses' rod. That's right. We're going to be going all the way back to a historical account in the Book of Jasher that has to do with Moses. Now, just to give you some backstory, this is after Moses has fled into Midian, and according to the Book of Jasher, he's now being held in the dungeon of Reuel, also known as Jethro, his father-in-law. And this is what it says. This is verse 37 of Jasher chapter 77. It says verse 36 is what we're going to saw. And he saw, and behold, the man Moses was living in the dungeon, standing upon his feet, praising and praying to the God of his ancestors. And Reuel commanded Moses to be brought out of the dungeon, so they shaved him, and he changed his prison garments and ate bread. And afterwards Moses went into the garden of Reuel, which was behind his house. And he there prayed to the Lord his God, who had done mighty wonders for him. And it was that whilst he prayed, he looked opposite to him, and behold, a sapphire stick was placed in the ground, which was planted in the midst of the garden. And he approached the stick, and he looked, and behold, the name of the Lord God of hosts was engraved thereon, written and developed upon the stick. And he read it, and stretched forth his hand, and plucked it like a forest tree from the thicket. And the stick was in his hand. And this was the stick with which all the works of our God were performed, after he had created heaven and earth, and all the host of them, seas, rivers, and all their fishes. And when God had driven Adam from the Garden of Eden, he took the stick in his hand, and went and tilled the ground from which he was taken. And the stick came down to Noah, and was given to Shem and his descendants, until it came into the hand of Abraham the Hebrew. And when Abraham had given all he had to his son Isaac, also he gave to him this stick. And when Jacob had fled to Paddan Aram, he took it into his hand, and when he returned to his father, he had not left it behind him. Also, when he was down to Egypt, he took it in his hand and gave it to Joseph, one portion above his brethren. For Jacob had taken it by force from his brother Esau. And after the death of Joseph, the nobles of Egypt came into the house of Joseph, and the stick came into the hands of Reuel the Midianite. And when he went out of Egypt, he took it in his hand and planted it in his garden. And all the mighty men of the Kenites tried to pluck it when they endeavored to get Zipporah, his daughter, but they were unsuccessful. So that stick remained planted in the garden of Reuel until he came who had a right to it and took it. And when Reuel saw the stick in the hand of Moses, he wondered at it, and he gave him his daughter Zipporah for a wife. Now, maybe this is just me, but when you look at the similarities between the account of Arthur pulling out the sword and the stone, and Moses plucking this rod from the garden of Reuel, the similarities are astonishing. And of course, the naysayers will just talk about how these are both medieval texts and one clearly borrowed from the other. And that's what I'm saying, is that, but one clearly did borrow from the other. And some would even go as far as to say that both are borrowing from some unknown source. I find that hard to believe, given, the accuracy that Jasher has with other more, we know for sure, more ancient Hebrew sources. And then even the Book of Jasher disagrees with some of those, and I'm more inclined to believe Jasher than a rabbinic source, because the Book of Jasher is mentioned by name twice in the Bible and accurately describes what was talked about by Paul in 2 Timothy 3 when he talks about how Moses withstood Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, talking about, the battle of the signs and wonders that happened in Egypt before the court of Pharaoh. So, and this particular version of the Book of Jasher that I've got does a great job of laying out the history and the introduction of Jasher. And how we can be sure, so this is just to give you a bit of a background. This is in the introduction, and this is the second paragraph under the question: how can we be sure that this is the real Jasher and not a forgery from the Middle Ages? It says there have been at least two forgeries. One is an ethical treatise from the Middle Ages and does not exist in English currently, as far as I know. It is somewhat Gnostic in style, beginning with a section on the mystery of creation. A second forgery was published in AD 1829, supposedly translated by Flaccus Albinus Alcuinus. These two are nowhere near the caliber of this Book of Jasher, and both are missing the information that Scripture tells in the real Book of Jasher. This is the only Jasher that corresponds with what the Scripture contains. And what he means is this particular Book of Jasher gets the stories right that the Bible alludes to, because what the Bible does is it takes a story in Joshua where the sun stands still and says, is it not written in the Book of Jasher? So the Bible actually invokes the Book of Jasher as an accurate historical account of the sun standing still. Now, what's interesting is there's another part about teaching men to use bows in 2 Samuel 1:18, and it says, is this not written in the Book of Jasher as well? And there's a story in here as with that one. From what I understand, I have not read that particular story as of yet, personally. But I know many people who have, and they do say that this Book of Jasher does seem to be the best fit that we know of for the Book of Jasher. Whether you believe that or not is totally fine, but what I do want to let you know is that this book seems to be a more ancient source material than that of Arthurian legend. And if that is the case, then what we are dealing with here is a story that has the archetypical roots that later led to this chosen one archetype. And I would argue a perversion of, when you look at the fact that Moses was the chosen prophet of God, called to deliver the people out of the bondage of Egypt and into the theocracy of, and what was a type and shadow, really, of the utopic society that will be the new Jerusalem in the new heaven and the new earth. Just a type and shadow of it. It still hasn't come to fruition, but Camelot and King Arthur is a perversion of this. And Gary Wayne does a great job of tying in Camelot with Sodom and Gomorrah, these Gnostic centers of light and illumination, and these beacons of knowledge and things like that, and reason. Think the age of enlightenment and the Renaissance, and where all of this, these mystery schools were reignited in the minds of the public. And it really is a fascinating story. Now, from here, what I'd like to do is switch to a story of a man by the name of Vortigern, who is a king that appears in some Arthurian legends, and how he tried to build a tower. And he could never get this tower to build, and it would always crumble before the tower would be complete. And I'm pretty sure many of you know where I'm going with this one. But we're going to read this real quick, and then when we go from here, we're going to take that in and tie it into the story of the Tower of Babel. So don't go anywhere. We still got a lot more to cover, so make sure you stick around for the next few segments of the show as well. So, if you're like me, you travel a lot. Hey, Trey here with Course Correction Radio and TV, and I just want to say, if you are on the road a lot, why are you not listening to the Shake and Wake Radio Network on shakeandwakeradio.com? On shakeandwakeradio.com, you will find tons of edifying content, including The Cutting Edge with John Hall, the nightly news and spiritual warfare with Dan Badandi, Through the Black with Tom Dunn, and so many more. So once you get to a point where you can safely pull over, make sure you pull up on your browser the Shake and Wake Radio Network over at shakeandwakeradio.com. What are you waiting for? All right, so this next story from the Arthurian legend we're going to read is actually from Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, which was written in the 12th century, and this is the introduction to it. It says, 5th century tribal leader Vortigern has taken refuge from Saxon invaders in Snowdonia, but his fortress keeps falling. His druid priests say it must be sprinkled with the blood of a virgin's child, and rumor has it that young Merlin had no father. Merlin then approached the king and said to him, "For what reason am I and my mother introduced into your presence?" "My magicians," answered Vortigern, "advised me to seek out a man that had no father, with whose blood my building is to be sprinkled in order to make it stand." "Order your magicians," said Merlin, "to come before me, and I will convict them of a lie." The king was surprised at his words, and presently ordered the magicians to come and sit down before Merlin, who spoke to them after this manner. "Because you are ignorant what it is that hinders the foundation of the tower, you have recommended the shedding of my blood for cement to it, as if that would presently make it stand. But tell me now, what is there under the foundation? For something there is that will not suffer it to stand." The magicians at this began to be afraid and made him no answer. And so this is just a tiny little excerpt. So, but what happens is it goes on. They look. There's a lake under the. There's a lake under this place where they're building this tower, and it's causing the tower to collapse into this lake where there's 2 sleeping dragons and things like that. Now, there's a couple of things we could tie this to. Number one, we have this building of a tower. Now let's go back to, I think it's Jasher chapter 11. So this is no, excuse me. It's chapter 9. And Abram was born in Noah's house 39 years later, and Abram knew the Lord from 3 years old, and he went in the ways of the Lord until the day of his death, as Noah and his son Shem had taught him. And all the sons of the earth in those days greatly transgressed against the Lord, and they rebelled against him, and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And the inhabitants of the earth made unto themselves at that time every man his god, gods of wood and stone, which would neither speak nor hear nor deliver the sons of men that served them. And the king and all his servants, and Terah with all his household, were then the first of those that served gods of wood and stone. And there's actually a really funny story here, but we're going to skip over that just for the time, and we're going to come down here. It says, verse 20, and King Nimrod reigned securely, and all the earth was under his control, and all the earth was of one tongue and words of union. And all the princes of Nimrod and the great men took counsel together, Put, Mitzrayim, Cush, and Canaan, with all their families, and they said to each other, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and in it a strong tower, and its top reaching heaven, and we will make ourselves famed, so that we may reign upon the whole world, in order that the evil of our enemies may cease from us, that we may reign mightily over them, and that they may not become scattered over the earth on account of their wars. And they all went before the king, and when they told the king these words, and the king agreed with them in this affair, and he did so. And all these families assembled, consisting about 600,000 men, and they went to seek an extensive piece of ground to build the city and the tower. And they sought in the whole earth, and they found none like one valley at the east of the land of Shinar, about 2 days' walk. And they journeyed there, and they dwelt there. And they began to make bricks and burn fires to build the city and the tower that they had imagined to complete. And the building of the tower was unto them a transgression and a sin. And they began to build it, and whilst they were building against the Lord God of heaven, they imagined in their hearts to war against him and to ascend into heaven. And all these people and all the families divided themselves in 3 parts. The first said, We will ascend into heaven and fight against him. The second said, We will ascend into heaven and place our own gods there and serve them. And the third part said, We will ascend to heaven and smite with bows and spears. And God knew all their works and all their evil thoughts. And he saw the city and the tower which they were building. And when they were building, they built themselves a great city and a very high and strong tower. And on account of its heights, the mortar and bricks did not reach the builders and their ascent to it. And to those who went up, it had completed a full year. And after that, they reached to the builders and gave them the mortar and bricks, and thus it was done daily. So according to this, it was taking them a full year to get up here. But it goes on to talk about how the Lord smote these 3 divisions and turned some into elephant men and monkey men and all of this stuff, and it was so interesting. And this is what it says. And those who were left among them, when they knew and understood the evil which was coming upon them, they forsook the building. And they also became scattered upon the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city and the tower. Therefore he called the place Babel. For the Lord confounded the language of the whole earth. Behold, it was at the east of the land of Shinar. And as to the tower which the sons of men built, the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up 1/3 part thereof. And also fire descended from heaven and burned another third. And the other third is left to this day, and is of that part which was aloft, and its circumference is 3 days' walk. And many of the sons of men died in that tower, a people without number. But notice the similarities here between Vortigern's tower and the Tower of Babel, and how the earth kept swallowing them. You can't make this stuff up, and you certainly can't write this stuff. Now notice what it goes on. It talks about this king wanted to sacrifice Merlin according to what his magician said. By the way, this comes out of Arthurian legend as well. This Arthurian legend comes out of the Book of Jasher as well. This is Jasher chapter 8. It says, and it was in the night that Abram was born, that all the servants of Terah and all the wise men of Nimrod and his conjurers came out and ate and drank in the house of Terah, and they rejoiced with him on that night. And when all the wise men and conjurers went out of the house of Terah, they lifted up their eyes toward heaven that night to look at the stars, and they saw, and behold, one very large star came from the east and ran into heavens. He swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of the heavens, and all the wise men of the kings and conjurers were astonished at this sight, and the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, this only betokens that the child that has been born to Terah this night, who will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess the earth, he and his children forever, and he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands. And the wise men and conjurers went home that night, and in the morning all of these wise men and the conjurers rose up early and assembled at the appointed house. And they spoke and said to each other, behold, the sight we saw last night is hidden from the king, and it has not been made known to him. And should this thing get known to the king in the later days, he will say to us, why have you concealed this matter from me? And then we will all suffer death. Therefore now let us go and tell the king of the sight which we saw, and the interpretation thereof, and we shall remain then clear. And they did so. And when they all went to the king and bowed down to him to the ground, they said, may the king live, may the king live. We heard that a son was born to Terah, the son of Nahor, the prince of thy hosts, and we yesternight came to his house, and we ate and drank and rejoiced with him that night. And when thy servants went out from the house of Terah to go out to our respective homes to abide there for the night, we lifted up our eyes to heaven, and we saw a great star coming from the east, and the same star ran with great speed and swallowed up 4 great stars from the 4 sides of the heavens. And thy servants were astonished at the sight of which we saw, and were greatly terrified. And we made our judgment upon the sight, and knew by our wisdom the proper interpretation thereof, that this thing applies to the child that is born to Terah, who will grow up and multiply greatly, and become powerful, and kill all the kings of the earth, and inherit all their lands. He and his seed forever. Now, of course, his seed is Jesus Christ. And now, our Lord and King, behold, we have truly acquainted thee with what we have seen concerning this child. It seemeth good to the king to give his father value for this child. We will slay him before he shall grow up and increase in the land, and his evil increase against us, that we and our children perish through this evil. And the king heard their words, and they seemed good in his sight. And he sent and called for Terah, and Terah came before the king. And the king said to Terah, I have been told that a son yesterday night was born to thee, and after this manner was observed in the heavens at his birth. And now therefore give me this child, that we may slay him before his evil springs against us, and I will give thee for his value thy house full of silver and gold. So notice here the similarity we have with both the magicians, the druids of Vortigern, telling him he must spill blood before this tower is completed. This tower that's being swallowed by the earth, by the way. And now we have the similarity of the sign in the heaven confirming that Abram, later called Abraham, and his seed, Jesus, would wipe out these kings of the earth. And what does Psalm 110 say? It says, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool, right? So we know that, Jesus is the promised seed. That's Galatians chapter 3. But anyway, let's focus on this. They wanted to kill Abram then, which this is just the seed war that's happening. The seed war of Genesis chapter 3. The seed of the woman shall be at enmity with the seed of the serpent. But what we do is we have these wise men telling the king that he needs to shed the blood of this innocent youth, right? So we have this similarity there as well. You guys, you literally can't make this stuff up. We have a archetype of the sword and the stone, an archetype of the Tower of Babel, and the archetype of the slaughtering of Abraham, all seen in some form or fashion later, or rather the sword and the stone, the tower, and the slaying of a child, all seen earlier, rather, in the book of Jasher. Now, I find this absolutely fascinating because, Friday night, we talked about how there is so much Antichrist typology that is seen in the realm of King Arthur. Now, I could go on and I could tell you about how Arthur had 12 knights at the round table, which I find interesting. And by the way, the so-called Christian tradition that it claims to be based off of is that these were based off of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Jesus. Then we have Merlin, this prophet, because Merlin wasn't always a wizard, he was a prophet. And, we have this Balaam-like sorcerer, this false prophet in Merlin. And then we have this false Messiah figure with Arthur, these 12 disciples of his. And this is what, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I just want to read a paragraph out of, excuse me, out of this is chapter 64, the Kings of Camelot, out of the Genesis 6 conspiracy. And it's only 2 pages, but I just want to read this last paragraph. Arthur and his Merovingian royal cousins who ruled France constituted the famous Sangreal Order of the Round Table. This order was dedicated as guardians to the Grail secrets. The Grail kingship of the Briton bloodline remained loyal and respectful to the French Merovingian dynasty until the Merovingian dynasty collapsed around 751 CE. This was most evident in Brittany, the land conquered by Arthur, where the British Dragon Court fell to the Saxons in England after 650 CE. The descendants and subjects of Arthur in Brittany felt obliged to accept the overlordship of the Frankish descendants of Clovis, the Merovingians, because of their joint royal lineage with the Briton Dragon Court. They later did the same through the invasion by the Norse Rex Deus that we covered previously. Now, here's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about how it talked about this Sangreal order of the Round Table. Now, the Sangreal, that has to do with the bloodline of the Holy Grail. Now, if you're not familiar, the bloodline of the Holy Grail is literally, the Holy Grail is the womb of Mary. Now, it's depicted twofold. Mary, the mother of Jesus, which carried this the Holy Grail was said to have this elixir of immortality within it. And of course, they believe, these sick bastards believe that this is, and I don't use bastards lightly because that's what these are. They're bastard half-breeds. And they believe that this blood of the womb of Mary will bring this eternal life. Now, that blood was passed down, with Jesus being this messianic figure, and then he passed that into Mary Magdalene. And now this bloodline has, according to the Gnostic Gospels and the Gnostic teachings, it carried on through Mary Magdalene and led to the Merovingians. And so you have this Order of the Round Table, which is, the guardians of the Holy Grail and the guardians of this Grail bloodline, right? And so with this Grail bloodline, they are actually the guardians of what the Round Table is they are the guardians of the beast, this Antichrist bloodline, which will lead to this final beast and false prophet of Revelation chapter 13. Now, like I said, we could go on about this all night, but honestly, it's getting late over here, and to be perfectly honest, I'm still exhausted from Friday night's show, but I think we're going to cut that out there, and let me know what you think. If you're listening on Anchor, you actually have the ability on the Anchor desktop site to be able to leave us a voice message. Leave us a voice message letting us know what you think of this, and we'll play it in the next show and answer back to you. So, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of CCR Weekly. I hope this has really helped open your eyes about the way that these Gnostic writers will pilfer, but not only the biblical text, but also they'll pilfer and usurp these extra biblical texts that were given to us, I believe, by God. And they'll use them to hide their sick, perverted symbolism in. So, guys, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time right here on CCR Weekly. Y'all take care.